All right, today's exercise science lab, we're talking about the split stance cable row. We're going to talk about some kinesiology terms, some functional anatomy, and how we program this a little bit. All right, so we're going to use the cable machine behind me. I love the cables. We talked about that a lot in lab. If you're an online coaching client of mine or a home client, oftentimes someone will have rubber bands like this, if they don't have a cable machine like this, where we can get our rows in. So we can wrap this around a beam in the house, a doorknob, something like that, and get a good row, either with just doing a rowing motion here or a single arm row like we'll do today. All right. We were talking about movement patterns. This is a pulling movement for the upper body. It's a horizontal pulling movement. We usually break this down as being a vertical or horizontal movement pattern, maybe a diagonal, all kind of hitting bodies your body a different way. Right, so if you're breaking down your upper body, you can do pulls one day, presses one day, or both superset back and forth, but this will be one of your horizontal pulls, along with dumbbell rows, seated cable rows, inverted rows, and the rows we'll do today. All right, so let's get into it, answer all the questions from lab, and comment below with any questions. All right, so one of my favorite moves I'll start with very quickly is a two-arm cable row. All right, so and I can do a split stance cable row. We're talking about doing a unilateral row today, single arm. I might get this on camera here, maybe like that. So I'll stand and get a row there. I love this move for warming up the upper body, for just working on this good athletic stance, and warming up the shoulder girdle and the shoulder joint. All right, I hit that with almost everyone who walks in. All right, all my clients, people who come in, I'll start with that one just to stay upright, pull back, especially if they've been at their desk chair a lot of the times, or standing with their typical posture here. I just want to get them in here, and I want them to just kind of pull, wake up those muscles, strengthen those posterior muscles, and then begin stretching out their anterior muscles, all right? But today we're talking about a single cable row, so we'll just put one handle on. If we were to use a rubber band handle, we just put one handle through the other, and then I'll stand in this position like that, all right? So what does this look like? We can stand anytime we work on our balance, any kind of athletic position. We always think about a squared stance here. This is our athletic stance, right? I can shoot a basketball, I can swing, I can do whatever in this stance, right? Hip width stance. I might stand with a split stance, which we'll talk about today, or a single leg stance. And I can do this row in all those stances. So if I want to work on just a good, strong, square bilateral stance, I can go here and just pull, all right? So there's a little rotational component, right? We're working in the transverse plane. It's kind of an anti-rotation move. We talk a lot about the Palloff press being good for that, but if I'm going to get a row like this, there's also going to be a rotational component. And then I can stand with the split stance, and I can stand on my opposite leg. So if I'm in my opposite leg here, I'm working this leg, and then rowing with my opposite arm. All right, so this form looked like this. We can do this two ways. In lab, we kept our hips square. My hips are squared to the front, and I just go right to where the cable attachment is, right where the cable's coming out from the machine. And I'm just going to draw straight back, all right? I'm going to draw with my elbows. I'm thinking about my back, my latissimus dorsi, maybe my teres major, working my shoulder joint. My rear deltoid may come into play, especially if I abduct my shoulder joint a little bit, right? My elbow comes out to the side some. For the most part, I'm not going to be totally squeezed against the side here. I want my shoulder blade to be able to move. So my shoulder joint's going to move, my glenohumeral joint, but my shoulder girdle also needs to retract. And to allow that to happen, it's okay to let that elbow come out 10, 20 degrees. It's going to allow a little more motion in my shoulder girdle versus being kind of squeezing against my side like that, all right? So that will allow me to roll back. The shoulder girdle is retracting. It might be downward rotating some if I'm kind of packing my shoulder blade as I come back. Protracts forward, retracts back. So that's my shoulder girdle and my shoulder joint both working there. Obviously my elbow is flexing. My wrist stays neutral. It doesn't deviate, it doesn't flex or extend. And what you will see clients do is as you pull back we'll flex your wrist a little bit, okay? We're kind of pulling with the wrong muscles. We're using our forearms too much as opposed to pulling back there, all right? the other variation I mentioned is that I can rotate on my back foot and then I can pull and get a little bit more of a rotational component. All right? So it just depends on what you're working, what you're focusing on. I can work my glute, my front leg. That glute, instead of just being a supporting muscle here, I can use that as not only a kind of an isometric contraction to stabilize the stance, but also as a rotator, as that when I go here, my right leg, my right hip externally rotates, and I use that glute a little more as well. All right? So it depends on what you're working, what variation you want to do. So to get to the questions, we asked three primary things. What anatomical sling are we working mostly here? So we talked about the muscles already. The shoulder joint muscles are the latissimus dorsi and teres major. Maybe a little bit of rear delt. The shoulder girdle muscles are the rhomboids and traps, all right, primarily retracting the shoulder blade. But the other, what we talk about is a sling. Thomas Myers, with his Anatomical Trains book, the concepts of anatomical slings. And one of the reasons I like this is that in this position here, in this stance, while my legs and everything's working quite a bit, the sling we're talking about is my right glute. So from my right glute here, travels up, and there's that X across to my left shoulder blade, right? So I'm stabilizing with my right glute, and then I'm pulling with my left shoulder. So it's this oblique posterior sling. So it's oblique, it's diagonal across the posterior aspect of my body, going from my left shoulder joint, left shoulder blade, across, hitting that lumbar, that thoracolumbar fascia, across my right lower back, and then that wraps around into my glute fibers, okay? So we're just thinking the kind of direction of fibers and what joints they're crossing when we're thinking anatomy, right? If I stand on one foot, I accentuate that even more, right? So I'm using my right hip even more and then pulling with my left upper body, all right? So my right foot is forward, my left arm is forward, right? I'm gonna pull back there, all right? Other questions, what fault do we often see? A couple things, which also relates to the third question, is what functional position? We talk about our functional position or archetypes. Is remember the overhead functional position? We want to see someone just have access to the overhead position. This particular move is your pressing. So the pressing functional archetype or position means, can we just get in a good pushing and pulling position with our shoulder? So if you have a client or patient who walks in and they have maybe a kyphotic curve in their upper back, their shoulders are rounded forward, what you're worried about is as they pull back, are they pulling into this anterior position with their shoulder joint, right? So that's what you're kind of watching. Where does that shoulder joint sit, right? And you really want to cue that. That's why I like that first cable row, because I'm trying to pull them out of that, right? Which is not only shoulder joint, glenohumeral motion, it's actually your shoulder blades that are pulling back. The other thing you're watching with the shoulder joint is whether it sits forward in the joint, right? So because if you picture that go back, if my humerus comes forward in the socket, you can see where my shirt is stretched right here, that's kind of equivalent to my anterior capsule, which is kind of that water balloon that encapsulates my shoulder joint, my bicep tendon, my anterior deltoids, a couple of different structures that could be bothered there. So we want it, as we pull back, we want our shoulder blades to come back and sit back into this position here. All right, so that's what it's looking like there. We call it kind of joint centration, that we want that shoulder joint sitting right kind of in the middle of the shoulder, and as we pull back, we go there. So if you see someone pulling into this position, stop them and see, can you just simply cue that back, or are they stuck there? And that might be a sign that their pec minor maybe is shortened. You gotta stretch that out a little bit, maybe do some snow angel stretches between sets, TRX, some cross stretches there, something like that. But that's the functional position we see, and that's also a movement fault. Otherwise, when we're standing here, we're always looking for too much of an anterior tilt, right? Where people just kind of hang in there into their lordotic spine or lordotic curve as they're pulling. Do they slightly engage? Their core is engaged. All right, so we're always kind of just aware of their pelvis, right? We don't always have to have them locked up and not breathing at all, but we just want to be aware that they're not hanging on their meat this way. Remember, you're hanging on your hip flexors was no good. So have them tuck their tail a little bit, and then pull from there. All right? So it's a great move. Rubber band, the cable machine, one arm, two arms, single leg, work them all, right? If you're coming off an ankle sprain, if you're just working on your athletic performance and you want to add something like this in, these are always, last thing we talked about in lab is that these are the accessory moves that I use. So after doing a heavier squat with two legs, or a heavier deadlift, a heavier bench press, something like that, my accessory moves, people will think of a calf raise or forearm curls being their accessory moves. I like these kind of compound total body movements where we work these different kind of anatomy trains and chains and slings and things like that, whatever terminology you want to use. All right, so there's that. And the other cable move will be an overhead tricep cable extension in the next video.